My husband took his kids on a Disney cruise and left my 8-year-old son home alone. I didn't discover it from him. I discovered it when a stranger called me at 12:07 a.m. and asked, "Are you Daniel's mother?" My blood ran cold. Daniel was supposed to be hundreds of miles away on that cruise ship. Instead, he had been sitting alone on a park bench for hours, waiting for his father to come back. I immediately booked the first flight home. But when Daniel finally looked me in the eyes, he whispered 6 words that changed everything. "Daddy said I'm not really family." My phone rang at 12:07 a.m., halfway across the world from my own home. I almost ignored the call. I was sitting alone in a hotel room in Singapore, exhausted after 14 hours of meetings. My husband had promised everything was fine back home. Daniel was fine. The other kids were having fun. The Disney cruise was going exactly as planned. Then the unknown number called again. I answered. "Is this Daniel's mother?"
Yes.
"Who is this?" "My name is Marcus. I'm sorry to call you this late, but your son is here with me." My stomach tightened. "Daniel? Where?" "He's sitting on a bench outside the community center. He's been here since around for this afternoon." For a second, I couldn't understand the words. "Since 4?
Yes.
He keeps telling me his dad is coming back for him." I stood so quickly my chair tipped over. "My husband is with him." "No," Marcus said quietly. "He isn't." Everything changed. My name is Emily, and my son Daniel was 8 years old. Old enough to understand a broken promise, but too young to understand why his father would leave him alone. I had been overseas for 6 days. Before I left, my husband, Jason, kissed me and said, "Go. I've got the kids." I believed him. Jason had 2 biological children from his previous marriage, 17-year-old Chloe and 13-year-old Ethan. Daniel was my son from a relationship before Jason, and I married. Jason always insisted the distinction didn't matter. 3 kids, he used to say. I believed him. That was why the Disney cruise hadn't worried me. When Jason suggested taking the children on a 6-day cruise while I handled my business trip, Daniel was thrilled. He had spent weeks talking about the ship and everything he wanted to see. Jason promised me he would take care of all 3. "Don't worry about Daniel," he'd said. "I'll make sure he has the time of his life." Now, a stranger was telling me my 8-year-old had been sitting alone for hours. I asked Marcus to stay with Daniel while I arranged for someone I trusted to pick him up. Then I called the local authorities and explained what happened. While I was making those calls, I opened the family group chat. There were dozens of messages. Pictures from the cruise. Jason beside a Disney character. Chloe smiling on the deck. Ethan holding a souvenir. A photo of them at dinner. Daniel was nowhere. I scrolled higher. The pool. The theater. Dinner. The ship's deck at sunset. Still no Daniel. Then I saw a message Jason had sent earlier that day. "Everyone's having a great time." I stared at it. "Everyone?" I called him. No answer. I called again. Finally, he answered. "Hey, what's wrong? Where's Daniel?" Silence. "Daniel?"
Yes.
"Where is my son?" Jason exhaled. "He's home." I felt the room tilt. Home.
Yeah.
He wasn't feeling well. I figured it was better for him to stay back. "You left our 8-year-old home?" "He's fine." "Who is with him?" Another pause. "Emily, you're overreacting." "Who is with him?" Jason didn't answer. That was enough. I hung up. I booked the first flight home. There were no convenient options. I didn't care. I paid whatever the airline charged and stared at the confirmation email. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words. He wasn't feeling well.
He's fine.
But Daniel wasn't fine. He had been sitting on a bench since 4 in the afternoon, waiting for his father to return. By morning, Marcus had arranged for Daniel to stay safely with my sister, Rachel. I called Rachel from the airport. "Is he okay?"
He's safe, she said.
"But he's confused. Did he tell you anything?" Rachel hesitated. "He keeps asking when his dad is coming back." I closed my eyes. Then she said something that made my chest ache. "Emily, he thinks he did something wrong." "No," I whispered.
No, he didn't.
I landed that evening and drove straight to Rachel's house. The second Daniel saw me, He ran into my arms. He didn't cry. That almost broke me more. He just whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." I pulled back. For what? His eyes filled with tears. Daddy said I couldn't go because I wasn't really family. I couldn't breathe.
Not really family.
Those 4 words told me something I hadn't wanted to admit. Jason hadn't forgotten Daniel. He hadn't misunderstood the schedule. He had made a choice. And now I was going to find out exactly why. The next morning, Daniel sat at Rachel's kitchen table, pushing cereal around his bowl without eating. I sat beside him. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Daddy said we were going on the cruise," he whispered. "But then he said I couldn't go." "Why?" "He said Chloe and Ethan were going, because they were his kids." I felt something inside me go completely still. For the first time, I wondered whether the cruise had been planned this way from the beginning. "Did he tell you to stay home?" Daniel nodded. "He said somebody would come get me." "Who?" "I don't know." "What happened after that?" "He said not to worry. He'd be back soon." Daniel looked down. So I waited. He had trusted his father. And Jason had used that trust against him. So I asked one final question. "Did Daddy ever say you weren't family?" Daniel nodded. After he packed the bags. I hugged him. "You are family. You're my son. Nothing he says can change that." That afternoon, I started checking everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted facts. The first thing I checked was the cruise reservation. Jason had forwarded me the itinerary weeks earlier. I pulled it up. 3 names. Jason,
Chloe,
Ethan. There was no Daniel. I checked the purchase date. The tickets had been bought 6 weeks before my business trip. That meant this wasn't a last-minute decision. Jason had never booked Daniel a ticket. I opened our messages. 6 weeks earlier, Jason had written, "The kids are going to have an amazing time." I had replied, "Daniel is going to be so excited." Jason had answered with a heart. He knew. He had watched me believe my son was included. Then I found a message he'd sent his sister 3 days before the cruise. "Emily needs to stop treating Daniel like he's fragile. I'm not changing everything for him anymore." His sister replied, "But he's only 8. Jason answered, "That's exactly the problem." Then I searched our older conversations. For months, Jason had complained about Daniel. Too sensitive. Too demanding. Always needing attention. I checked our family group chat. There were messages I'd barely noticed. Jason telling relatives that Daniel was difficult. Jason calling me overprotective. He even joked that he and his biological children deserved a vacation without drama. That word made my stomach turn. That was what he called my 8-year-old son. Then I found a conversation between Jason and his former wife. "I'm trying to make things easier for everyone," Jason wrote. "Emily's attachment to Daniel is becoming unhealthy." His former wife asked, "Are you saying you want him out of the picture?" Jason replied, "Her marriage can't revolve around him." I put my phone down. This wasn't about a cruise. It was about how Jason saw my son. An obstacle. I checked our financial records and found several recent expenses I couldn't explain. A hotel weekend. An expensive dinner for 2. Then I found messages discussing what our family might look like if our marriage ended. Together, they showed Jason had been thinking about a life without Daniel and possibly without me. I called a family law attorney. I explained what had happened and showed her the records. She told me to document everything, avoid emotional confrontations, and make Daniel's safety the priority. So I did. I stopped arguing and started collecting the truth. I saved the cruise reservation, the messages, the travel records, and Marcus's statement about finding Daniel alone. Then Jason came home. He walked through the door carrying souvenirs. A stuffed toy for Chloe. A hoodie for Ethan. Then he saw Daniel sitting beside me. His smile disappeared. "Emily," he said carefully, "sit down." He looked at the papers on the table. "What happened?" I pushed the cruise reservation toward him. "Why wasn't Daniel on it?" He barely looked at the page. "I told you. He wasn't feeling well. You booked these tickets 6 weeks before we left." Silence. "Who is supposed to watch him?" "I thought someone was." "Who?" He didn't answer. I placed my phone beside the reservation. I spoke to the man who found him. Jason's face changed. Emily, you're making this bigger than it was.
No.
I looked directly at him. You left an 8-year-old alone because you didn't want him on your vacation. You don't understand. Then explain it. He looked toward Daniel, then back at me. And finally, he said the words I would never forget. Daniel isn't my responsibility. I felt strangely calm, because suddenly everything made sense. I looked at my husband. You're right. He blinked. I continued. Starting tonight, neither are you. Jason had no idea what I had already done. And he was about to discover that leaving Daniel behind had created a record he couldn't erase. The next morning, Jason acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee. He checked his phone. He even asked Daniel whether he liked the souvenirs from the cruise. Daniel didn't answer. I stood across the kitchen, watching my husband. He looked tired, but not guilty. That told me everything. I had spent the night documenting everything. The messages, the cruise reservation, Marcus's statement. I wasn't going to scream or threaten him. I was going to let the truth speak for me. Jason finally looked at me. Emily, can we talk? We are talking. He lowered his voice. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting sunscreen. A mistake is missing a flight. I pointed toward the hallway. You left an 8-year-old child alone. I thought someone was checking on him. You thought. He rubbed his forehead. I was overwhelmed. You had 6 weeks to plan that cruise. He said nothing. Then he tried another explanation. I wanted some time with my kids. I stared at him. Daniel is your child too. No, he said quietly. He's your son. There it was. The sentence I needed. Not an excuse. A choice. I showed him the messages I had saved. His face changed when he saw them. The conversation with his sister. The comments about Daniel being difficult. The cruise reservation showing only 3 names.
He looked at me.
Where did you get those? I was trying to understand why my son was abandoned. You're making this about revenge.
No.
I looked toward Daniel's bedroom. This is about making sure he never thinks your decision was his fault. That afternoon, I met with the attorney again. She reviewed everything. Her advice was simple. Don't make threats. Don't post anything online. Don't involve the children in the conflict. Document what happened and let the appropriate process handle it. I agreed. Real consequences didn't require revenge. They required evidence. So I gave the attorney everything. The cruise documents, the messages, the witness information, the timeline, and Daniel's statement. Nothing was exaggerated. It was simply the truth. Jason soon realized the situation was more serious than he expected. He asked me to reconsider. Then he apologized, became angry, and apologized again. The pattern was obvious. He wasn't sorry that Daniel had been left alone. He was sorry that I knew. A week later, Jason asked to speak with me privately. I want my family back, he said. I looked at him. You had a family. I can fix this.
No.
Emily, please. You can't fix the moment Daniel sat on that bench waiting for you. His eyes filled with tears. I didn't think he'd understand. He understood perfectly. I told him something else. You didn't just hurt me. You taught an 8-year-old that he could be excluded from his own family. Jason started crying. But I didn't comfort him.
Not this time.
The legal process moved forward. Because of what had happened, Jason was no longer trusted to take responsibility for Daniel without appropriate supervision. Our marriage was also ending. When relatives heard the complete story, some were shocked. Others admitted Jason had been complaining about Daniel for months. One relative told me, "We thought you knew." I asked, "Knew what?" She hesitated. That Jason wanted a family that was just him and his biological kids. I finally understood that the cruise wasn't the beginning. It was the moment his private feelings became impossible to hide. Months later, Daniel was doing better. Sometimes he'd ask whether his father was angry with him. I'd tell him the same thing every time. Adults make choices. Children don't cause those choices. Eventually, I took Daniel on a trip of our own. Not to compete with Jason or erase what happened. Just to give my son a memory that belonged to us. On the flight home, Daniel looked out the window. Mom, yeah. Will you ever leave me somewhere again? I reached across the seat and held his hand. Never. He smiled. And for the first time since that midnight phone call, I felt like I could breathe. Jason thought the Disney cruise would prove that his biological children mattered more. Instead, it proved something much more important. It showed me exactly who he was. And it gave me the courage to walk away. I didn't destroy his life. I didn't need to. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. And in the end, that was the one thing he never saw coming.